Hello, everyone, and welcome tonight to our online live streamed support session for AHPs and all of our wonderful colleagues. My name's Rachel Moses, and you are listening to the AHP Leader podcast. And I'm delighted today to be joined by a fantastic panel of people, wonderful people who I'm sure you all recognise straight away. So I'm going to just take it nice and slow while we wait for people to join. Thank you very much for signing up via the Eventbrite link. And for those of you that either subscribe to the channel or have seen this on Twitter, myself and Beth from Generation AHP will be keeping an eye on the social media channels and the lovely students that are live streaming it elsewhere. Thank you very much. So please do ask any questions either through the DMs on Generation AHP, myself, they're all open channels, or on YouTube itself. So you can ask private messages. Obviously, you can be completely confidential, or you can pop them on YouTube. This is going to be an hour session. I'm very conscious that the majority of the panel are on annual leave this week, so I'm even more super grateful that they've joined me. But I'm just going to ask the panel to introduce themselves, just a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and why you're on this panel tonight. Beth.
Hi everyone, my name's Beth Sykes. I'm a clinical specialist physiotherapist up in Birmingham, and I run a student and new graduate page called Generation AHP, which supports them through the early stages of their career. So yeah, I'm here really to support the health and wellbeing of all physiotherapists and the AHPs, no matter who we come into contact with.
Thank you. Odette.
Hi everyone, my name is Odette Richardson. I'm the Head of Occupational Therapy at Newcastle upon Tyne Hospitals. I'm here this afternoon because I have a keen interest in supporting staff to use self-care to improve their resilience.
Thanks, Odette. And Odette's here as well because she works across acute and community. So we're going to complement each other really nicely there from a pure acute specialist kind of support network, and Odette across both pathways. So thank you. Jo.
Hi, I'm Jo Fillingham. I'm Deputy Chief Allied Health Professions Officer in NHS England and NHS Improvement. I think Rachel's invited me to give a bit of a national perspective, but I guess a couple of things from me. One of my mantras is, and has been for some time now, so some of you may have heard it before if you've heard me speak, is that in the NHS or in wider health and care services, care is our business, like that's our bread and butter. So if we don't care for our staff, dare I say, love them, then we're definitely getting something wrong. So I'm delighted to be part of this discussion, to both share but also learn, hopefully, as well. And I have to give a disclaimer because I am on annual leave today and I've been at Alton Towers all day. So if any of you are living around the Staffordshire area, you'll know it's absolutely teamed it down all day. So I've been freezing to the core, came home, had a quick hot bath, so I'd warmed up. So I do it. Please excuse me that I'm so red.
Thanks for the disclaimer, Jo. And I did say we might have some worried viewers wondering why you do look a little bit red in the face. So thank you, Jo. Really appreciate you being here. And last but by no means least, the wonderful Julie.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Highfield. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist working in staff support in adult and paediatric critical care in South Wales. I also in the summer started as secondment 2 days a week to the Intensive Care Society as their National Director of Wellbeing. So I'm representing that as well. And I do work with the British Psychological Society and have been part of the COVID working group for helping people make sense of the pandemic and particularly supporting psychologists as well.
Thank you, Julie. And so hopefully the short introductions from each of the panel members there will give you a feel about why they're joining us tonight. And this session has been put on for any of you that's seen any of our previous work, like as a team, we've really been trying to support AHPs and colleagues throughout this recovery / preparation for second wave COVID-19. It's something that we've not really done before on this scale. So it's, you know, it's very, you know, new in its kind of development, but we've had really good feedback. And the reason for this particular session was there was lots of feedback around how we can cope, how we can support each other, how we can support ourselves, how we can work together as teams, and not just within teams within my organisation, but teams of teams across professions, across the AHPs and across everyone else, like Beth says, we'll come into contact with. So everyone's more than welcome in this discussion. The panel members are more than happy to be reached out to as well. So please, like, DM myself, Beth on Twitter. We AHPs are very much here in the background. They just couldn't physically give someone up tonight to be here. So please DM them as well. And I'm really going to start by talking about burnout, fatigue, and how we are all feeling, Julie. Now, you are a real clinical leader in this field, and we're so grateful to have you not only as on this panel, but as part of our professional group. And, you know, I don't even know where to start in terms of what advice do you have to people, but if I give you a feel of some of the things that people are saying. So people generally are fearful and anxious at this stage of the pandemic. People are exhausted mentally, physically, emotionally. If we think about people as individuals, they're worried about how they can get through winter and how this next phase of the pandemic within their professional roles. So maybe if we start there, you know, maybe acknowledgement of, is this a normal thing to feel? Should we be more resilient? You know, that word we talk about.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, you know, everything you described there, Rachel, is so what I'm hearing from colleagues, and also what I am feeling and have felt myself on and off throughout. And I guess there is this general feeling around of, my goodness, what was that we just went through? Can we possibly in any way do this again? And I think that there are decisions that are being made for various reasons about the way we deal with it this time round, where people are hugely anxious about doing this again without some of their huge resources and the huge energy behind it. And, you know, one of the things, it's a bit of a tagline that we've used all the way through, and it is so still true. It really is okay not to be okay. Talking to a member of staff just yesterday, and I said, you know, we're still in the pandemic, don't you? And she was like, yeah, but it's normal now, isn't it? And I think what has happened a lot is the kind of systems mindset has shifted to sort of say, get used to this is what you're doing now. And this is where the word resilience can be a little bit misused, really. It's almost like, here's your new baseline to return to, here's your conditions to kind of deal with. And it is exhausting. It's taken an awful lot out of people. I would say it's a really important thing to acknowledge. A lot of people did really well and experienced a huge amount of joy and drive and excitability in sorting things out and innovating, and there was a huge surge and rush. But there was a lot of kind of redeployment and changing roles and chaos that was out there, and people pulled it out of the bag somehow in the UK, and they gave it their all. And I think that the reality is that they then probably just have not had enough time to slow down, stop, think, process, make sense of what they've been through. And now they're anticipating, get ready for the next wave or the next ripple, as I've tended to call it, because I think it's going to bob up and down rather than feel like one giant one. But who am I to predict? That's not my job. And I guess just a little bit about the burnout aspect of that, because I think a lot of people were kind of broadly predicting PTSD in this, and actually we were really strong to say, don't forget the burnout as well. And I think in the trauma PTSD, what I've seen is actually much closer to the physiological trauma of it. And what I'm describing to staff members is body shock. Actually, they can't necessarily name one particular episode, one particular day, one particular incident. It's just the onslaught and that overactivation of their autonomic nervous system. Their stress systems are ramped right up, and they've just held it and held it and held it, and they've just not been able to come back down yet. And that is the real exhaustion component of burnout. Burnout is a syndrome, a cluster that co-occurs of three things. One is emotional exhaustion, nothing left in the tank, nothing left to give. The other, which is almost like a kind of psychological coping response, is depersonalization or cynicism, which is like a massive step back to cope. It's a massive way of saying, I'm just going to disconnect. I'm just going to almost not know my patient's name, my patient's story, just as a way to emotionally buffer myself. And then, so those are the two biggest emotional kind of physiological components. And then, the researchers say that the third part, the lack of a sense of personal accomplishment at work, feels like it's just something that runs alongside. And I tend to find that you have more a foot in the exhaustion camp or more a foot in the disconnection camp. Some people swing between the two, but some people go more one way or the other. And these are extreme ways that our brains try to make sense of and cope with just the onslaught. So absolutely, if you're feeling like this, you are normal. This is, yes, it's an extreme response, but we're in extreme circumstances. I don't know if you want me to get into tips to manage it just yet, but I think that the most important tip is you are a human being and you have a limit. Please, please, please acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. Please know that in this second wave that you cannot possibly give what you gave the first time round, and that really is okay. That really is acceptable. We need our staff to not go pop. So I'll pause there because I really got on my soap.
No, that's, I mean, I've got a few comments, 13 minutes in, and people feel like they've already had a bit of a therapy session with you, Julie. So thank you so much. I'm going to pick up on some things here as a manager, maybe coming into Odette as well. So we know that people respond to crisis situations or, anything compared to a crisis situation differently. Okay, people do that. People are humans, human behaviors, depends on your past experiences, the personality types, what you've been modeled to react like. But what we're absolutely seeing in this pandemic, in the first wave, was everyone had to behave the same. We were all in the same stage nationally together. We all went through it at the same stage together. We're all in national lockdown. We all had the same rules. What we're seeing now going into this second wave, or ripple as you call it, is different parts of the country, therefore different teams, therefore different infrastructures, all at different stages of this response. So therefore, that creates fragmentation, and that creates different things for different peoples. And I'm hearing amongst like the AHP's professional groups that's really hard for people to get in that psyche a little bit. It's that initial national feel, the clap, everything that came with it just isn't there as a supportive mechanism as well. And that's contributing to people's personalization of the situation. So, and this is really important for some HPs and colleagues that are listening who have family in other tier parts of the country, whether it be in Wales and Ireland and you live in London or wherever. And this is adding to this emotional turmoil. And I think that in terms of how people are reacting to that, Julie, is a new thing. I don't know, Odette, if you're seeing that within your community-based teams and across sectors as well.
Yeah, definitely. It is a factor in terms of it's very different to the first time round, and staff are finding different ways of coping, but everybody's tired. That's the challenge. People have given so much in the first round that most people are running on empty at the moment, and we just need to find a way of shoring up their resilience so that they can get through the next phase.
Yeah, and it's that, I mean, the resilience word is really, and me and Julie have spoke about this at length, and I think I was on a podcast with you, Odette, and someone mentioned the word resilience and they had a totally different concept of it, Julie. And I think resilience has been forced on us as healthcare clinicians, and that's why we don't like it, because if you're not resilient, you've failed, and if you're not resilient, you haven't coped. But actually, resilience isn't about that. It's using your resilience to achieve something or be better or do something. And I think I like that concept, and I think we need to hold on to that word. But no, the way it's being used at the moment, it has so many bad connotations for people, including myself. So you talked about tips, but I think you absolutely know where we are as a profession, Julie, and we can't give people magic energy. As managers, as leaders, we wish we could sprinkle that fairy dust and give people that oomph, but we just can't. What kind of things matter to individuals? What kind of things can we be doing for our colleagues, for our peers within our circles? What can we do for people wider afield? What kind of easy tips do you have? And then, Jo, I'm going to come into you for some of the work the national team are doing as well around this. But give us some top Julie tips.
I try my hardest, because I think everyone's at different phases, so it's kind of thinking about what's something that's global and unites us. I think setting limits and setting boundaries are really key, and I think managers can really help the staff by doing that, in terms of actually what's realistic, what can we really do. And I think, AHP's therapies, we do what we do because we really enjoy helping people reach their potential. But if we're being so stretched, actually that's really compromising our kind of almost our core integrity. So it's helping people to think they're doing the best they can with what they've got, and managers absolutely setting those limits with people, and setting your own personal limits with that. I think there is something about, you think about resilience and that bouncing back from adversity, but the adversity keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. So it's thinking, okay, what can be the core conditions for me to bounce back to? And if it's hard to feel like I've got those core conditions at work, what are my core conditions at home? Getting the basics right, getting the environment right, thinking about going into winter and darkness. And I'm a big Scandi fan. I believe in everything the Scandis do. I do Hugger, and all of that is really about kind of trying to do that cozy kind of baseline self-care stuff is really key. But in work, have we got those core conditions with each other? One of the things I worry about and I see is, with this second wave, it kind of feels like the gratitude of the general public has waned. The patience has waned, and then our stresses, and we're taking it out on each other. So really thinking about team now, thinking about that kind of, I prefer the idea of team resilience, so that someone's got to go on the bench so someone else can go out there and play the game. That kind of, we're looking after each other, we're swapping with each other, we're spending that time together. And I think where you can, and I've got mine lined up locally for the week I come back from annual leave, is take time together to just talk, actually, and make sense of this from a psychological point of view. I don't think we're there yet in processing this. I think we're holding, and we just need spaces to just chew it over and spit it out. We really do. And where it's so hard with social distancing, and you can't book teaching rooms, you have to have it on a Zoom, and it's not quite the same, and all of those kind of social places have totally disintegrated. You walk down the corridor and you see someone in PPE, and you can't quite tell if they're smiling acknowledgement at you or if they're blanking you. So all of those spaces for us to connect have really gone. So you kind of almost have to force that. You have to really work on that, work on the connection, work on the talking, work on the processing where you can. And even if you can only do it one or two people at a time, just do it. Chew it over. People will find they're in the same place, and that relief of, me too, yeah, just like that for me. It makes such a difference. It really does.
No, I'm really grateful you said that. And one of the reasons for this whole session is so people, if they haven't got that space or that person that can hear from us, that that's real. I mean, Liz, thanks for your DM. There is no endpoint. We said this on one of their podcasts. The problem here when you're dealing with crisis management is normally at this stage, what was 7, 8 months now, no crisis, you're in the crisis resolution phase of any natural disaster, humanitarian crisis. We're nowhere near the resolution phase. We're in this, like you said, this reactivation stage. We're waiting, we're ready for it. We're ready for the second wave ripple in our area if it hasn't hit us already. So when there's no end point, people like me, you don't process it. My experience is I'm just keep going and keep going and keep going because I'm okay. I can do that. And I've got my coping strategies, Julie, don't get me wrong. Like, you don't need to be worried about us, but I know my limits, but there's people that just have never been through anything like this before. And it's like you said, it's just having that space and availability to let yourself go and say, actually, I'm not okay. Where can I go? Where can I be signposted here? You hope it's within your organizations, but if it's not, there is other places that you can go to get help. And we're definitely going to have some resources that we can put on the YouTube and send out.
Can I just say one little last thing, actually, in terms of that no end point? One of the things I've been doing in staff one-to-ones is actually advising people to set arbitrary milestones, saying there's no end point in this, but can I make it to the end of the day? Can I make it to the end of the week? Can I make it to Christmas? And it almost kind of creating milestones and points to punctuate that timeline, because it just feels like the never, never otherwise. So yeah,
love that, Julie. Lots of nice comments, Julie, about you coming through. Joe, I'm coming down to you now for some of the work that the national team are doing, but even just in your wisdom of all things leadership.
Thanks, Rachel. I just wanted to carry on with that conversation about what things can we do as leaders to help people, and probably just share some kind of my values base and my thinking behind it, really, and kind of some of the ways, my behaviours with team members is, we always talk about listening, don't we? But do we always get listening right? But truly listening to staff, and listening about what are their fears, what are their anxieties, all of that, and really listening and really taking it in, because everybody will be different and individual about what their fears and anxieties are. We've all got different backgrounds, we've all got different experiences, we're all got different families and now a makeup of families and different friends. So definitely our fears and anxieties will all be different. So truly listening to that is so important. And then, my other mantra is, and I might, is our health and well-being of our staff and that of their family members has got to come first before anything else. And I say that to my team. Your health and well-being and that of your family comes before any of what you've got in your daily tasks today. It's got to. That's got to be number one. I think, we always, the contracts and all that we've got in the NHS are the legal parts. But actually, and we can't get off the fact that we've got contracts and policies and processes and blah, blah, blah. But if our values base is that, first and foremost, people's health and well-being and that of their families or close friends is the most important, then we can find ways around getting around contracts, etc. And the other thing is, one of the kind of new ways of working is what matters to you, rather than what's the matter with you, that we do with our patients. But actually, for me, that's what we should be doing with the people that we work with as well. What matters to you in this next hour, in this next day, in this next week, in this next month? And how can we ensure that what matters to you, that we can make that happen and ensure that we, allay some of those fears or anxieties? I think one of my concerns, and, a national, regional, I'm sure local level, in this second wave, and as you say, we're going to continue, aren't we, until we find a vaccine, is the fact that we know the demands of the workforce are increasing, because, you know, in the first wave we did concentrate on COVID. In second wave, we've got business as usual services and now more increasing COVID again. My real concern, I think, for managers and leaders to manage is, we know that workforce demand is going to increase, and usually to get that extra capacity, we either cancel annual leave or give people extra shifts or ask people to work late. And, you know, my worry is that again is just not sustainable, and we need to think very differently about how the workforce that we need and where we'll get that workforce from, such that we're not keep pulling on the reserves of the staff that have been through phase one. So that's, I guess, a bit of the leadership discussion and a bit of kind of what keeps me awake at night, and would do if I was an operational manager. So Rachel, you might want to talk a little bit more about that. I know, Death, about how do you balance that around workforce planning and the health and well-being of staff to deliver quality and safety services. Shall I just carry on then, Rachel, about what's happening nationally?
Yeah, go on, please do. And then I think what will be nice if me and Odette come in with some of the lived experiences of people working, and then we can come back to Julie, Beth, and we've definitely got some questions coming through. So that would be great, Jo.
Great, thank you. So I'm in the national AHP team, and what we've been doing is putting on a series of webinars. So there's been a couple of webinars on health and wellbeing, which you know, you can catch up on via our virtual platform, which we can give you Magatu's details, who manages that platform, and anybody who wants to join that platform and look back at those resources, you're more than welcome to. And we've also been producing kind of some Twitter cards about snapshots of where you can find health and wellbeing support. Suzanne Nashtik, the Chief Allied Health Professions Officer, has tweeted most of those, so you'll find them if you go on her Twitter and look through her media. But I think one of the greatest resource for all staff, not just AHPs, is on our NHS People, so the people.nhs.uk website. There's such amazing resource on there now. There's telephone support for staff, online support, there's webinars on there, there's access to apps, there's virtual staff common rooms, there's lots and lots of different guides, there's some blogs on there, there's pathways in terms of looking after yourself. And there's also bereavement support on there. So if you haven't looked at that website yet, I would really encourage you to go and have a look at that website. There's something, I think, for everybody, because not everybody accesses things in the same way. You know, some people don't like face-to-face, they want to speak to someone on the phone, or so there's lots and lots of different things on there. And then just lastly, one of the things we've been working on, we were actually working on it prior to the pandemic, was a quick guide to highlight AHP's innovative work around occupational health. And we had to pause that publication because of the pandemic. We've lifted it back up now and reviewed it in the light of the pandemic. And we should be publishing that soon, in terms of how AHPs can help staff health and wellbeing in the pandemic and in the longer term as well. And we're working with the People Directorate and Prena Isar's team on that.
Thank you. And I do encourage people to be signposted to some of the information that Jo's just said there. And there's an incredible amount of work going on around equality and diversity as well. And Jo very kindly came and jumped on a podcast we done with the national leaders in terms of acknowledging the disparity report from Public Health England. So for all of our colleagues listening from BAME backgrounds, our colleagues of colour, and from other marginalised communities, like, please reach out, because we do have resources and other podcasts as well. Just want to make that shout out and acknowledge that. So, Odette, coming down to you, my friend. So, this is where I just really want to start getting into some of the questions. Some great comments coming through. It's just so nice to hear that people are having these lived experiences. So, from a kind of clinician, people, human perspective, what challenges are your teams having at the moment in terms of everything we've just discussed?
So one of the things that's happening at the moment is, as healthcare staff, we like to overgive and underreceive. So staff will always give 110% and yet not expect it back. So the biggest challenge is to try and get staff to value themselves. They value everybody else, but they don't necessarily value themselves. And that's really important. So as a manager, I find that I need to take time out and to, sit down and say, well, actually, this is your self-care time. You need to make sure that you get X, Y, Z. One of the other challenges is that within this second phase, lots of people sort of neglected to go to hospital during the first wave. And so people are getting all these diagnoses and they're very late. So we've got lots of palliative patients coming through and staff have to support them at home. And that emotional burden is an extra additional burden that they didn't have in the first bit. And so it's a real struggle because they need to balance that out in terms of supporting the patients, but also ensuring that they themselves are able to give as much as they can to keep those patients at home, to help them to live their last days in peace and whatever that might take. So it's a mixed bag and there's various different layers in terms of what we have to do. But our greatest asset, as you all know, is our staff. And if we don't look after staff, then we're going to have a serious problem because there'll be nobody to look after our patients. So that's one of the challenges.
Yeah, and I think that mirrors true from some of the feedback that we're getting, not just from staff, from managers as well, like Joe said. We are having added, I suppose, challenges with the shielding rules at the moment or the lack of shielding rules, but we're very vulnerable staff workers. There might be new changes coming in with pregnant workers after 28 weeks. There's a lot of grey areas. And of course, those workers that are still shielding at home or who are working completely from home. And I think it's really fair to say we didn't acknowledge the true impact and added value they gave during first wave until very recently. I think going into second wave, second ripple, we are a lot more confident in what people working from home can achieve because we've acknowledged it now. And really just the burden that has on people. I've had a couple of DMs about this, so thank you. We do have a whole shielding podcast as well for anyone that's feeling like they've got no one to turn to. Please watch that. But yeah, it's about the homework. You're in your home and you're doing work.
Yeah.
And I could not work from home all the time. Oh my goodness, how people do it. People think it's easy, and I just think I don't know how people could do it. So I think adding on to Odette's points, and then for me, it's probably some of the friction we're now seeing between staff groups, Julie. I've had a couple of messages just this week, about other professional groups getting short with each other, we've seen this massive come together. Now we're starting to see this disconnect. We've got it worse than you've got it better than us. You're allowed to work from home 2 days a week, we can't. You think about the bedside nurse there's no way they can do any remote work. And so we're starting to see some of these fractions coming in teams and dividing teams, so which we haven't had. This is the first stage I think we're having this. So keeping them relationships, like you said, Odette, is really important, but it's keeping them relationships when you're already emotionally fatigued, you're already feeling knackered, you just think, oh God, I can't be bothered. And you are a bit short with people. Is there any magic tools around this? And I know that psychological support and looking after yourself we see it plastered everywhere now. And at some of it's a bit tokenistic, in my opinion. It's like, oh, look after yourself, make sure you leave work on time, make sure you have your lunch break, but sometimes it's just really hard to do that, like Odette said, when you've got 45 patients more than you would normally have to see. So that's loads and loads and loads, isn't it, Julie, there? I think it all kind of boils down to the same thing in some respects. Everything you've already said about looking after yourself, looking after each other, signposting the things. But do you want to pick up on anything of that in particular? And then we're going to come to very specific questions next.
Yeah. Okay. Gosh, I mean, lots in that I can really relate to, and in a way, in the catharsis of joining in with one of these kind of panels, you kind of go, oh, thank goodness it's not just our hospital. You do have those feelings, and in my role with the ICS, I've managed to kind of hear that across the UK. And I guess there's two huge things I would say there. In that kind of frayed at the edges that we all are, there's this part of us, if you think about shielding just as an example and working from home versus being on the front line of things, there is this real sense of who's had it worse. Who's had it worse? I've had it worse. You don't know what it's like for me. I've had it worse. And you could be saying that from any position, because let's face it, we've all had it worse than we've ever had in our entire lives. We all have. We've all had our own version of worse. And I think that comes back to that perspective taking and kind of coming back together to realize we all have our own pandemic here. And if we're frayed on the edges and we're attacking each other, then we're lost. We're really lost. But there's this thing. It's one of my most repeated used cut and paste slides that I sort of throw into any presentation, which is when your brain is planning for war, it doesn't attend to pro-social behavior. And this really comes down to this idea we have about different ways of managing emotion broadly in humans. And we have our kind of drive mode, which we had at the start of the pandemic, go, 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 go. We have our self-compassion, other compassion mode, which is what happens when you just have enough to go around and everyone feels like, yeah, I've got it. I can look after myself, I can care for the other, and it's great. But the mode we're in right now is threat mode. People feel unsafe. They've lost that energy and drive. They've lost that collegiate, collaborate sense of working together, or at least it's frayed on the edges and their tolerance is really, really low. And I think what we need to acknowledge is we feel an overwhelming sense of threat, and it's making us all just a bit tribal and all a bit them and us about it all. And the most important message there is these are known psychological processes and they're happening everywhere, and they could have been predicted. And to come back from the edge, we have to come back to the safety of each other. We have to think about our own personal safety, what makes us feel good at home, but also the safety of each other in our teams. You know, I think start with your kin, start with your tribe, if you like, your OTs, your physios, your speeches, come together, but then reach out to each other one by one and realize, again, kind of repeating myself, but it's so important. We're in this together. We've been through the same kind of stuff together, and to get back to care for ourselves and each other, we need to shift from threat to safety, and our safety is together in how we look after each other.
You are literally reading people's mind. I've literally had a DM. I'm going to screenshot it and send you later. So this girl is reading my mind. So you've just touched on so many questions and DMs there, and I know, Beth, you've got one particularly on psychological first aid we'll come to, but it's that, and then it's the guilt. You've touched on it. If you weren't frontline, it didn't matter. You know, I worked in 3 different organizations in the height of the pandemic, and I worked in critical care, and there was a difference. And it's like, if you weren't on the front line, you felt guilt, and you should have been. You were guilty you weren't there. If you were office based, or you were in education, or I suppose even Joe, like a national level, it's like people had this overwhelming guilt that they weren't in the front line, and then people forgot about the community, and they forgot about all of these services that went virtual to keep people out of hospital and keep people alive. And then, we think about our paramedic colleagues and everyone. So I think the reassurance is from our perspective, like, everyone is valued, but people really don't feel it, Julie. So where can we go from there? What these people that are listening just feel guilty, they feel undervalued, they don't feel appreciated, yet they're working 16-hour days and they're giving everything in. You know, people even have said on their podcast, sorry, I feel dead passionate about this, you know, the clap, they were guilty for the clap. They wouldn't go out and clap, they wouldn't listen to the clap. The clap's not for me. And yes, I'm NHS, but you know, like, where'd you go if you're feeling like that?
This is what keeps me awake at night, because I think no matter what I do, any thanks that I might give personally feels like it's nothing in comparison to what people have given. And I think that's the reality of it, and the guilt that is around for all of us. And you know, working with other psychologists who feel like they've worked their socks off but have been told, where are you, or you haven't done enough. And it does really feel like, gosh, what do we do, what would be enough? And I think this may sound like a cop-out, but the place I go to is, whatever I do, it's never enough. It's a pandemic. What did I expect? Whatever any of us do, it will never match what COVID has taken from us and what it's asked of us. But where we can, we should acknowledge that, and we should try to say thank you. We should try to actually say, you know what you've been through, my goodness, good on you. I'm so glad I work with you. I'm so glad you're at my side. The thanks, that everyday thanks, wherever you can find it, goes such a long way. And I guess the other thing, Odeth made a really good point about it, that lack of self-compassion in our NHS staff is astounding, actually. And it's like a brick wall I come up against so many times when I'm doing one-to-ones with people, is that they not only can't put themselves first, they can't put themselves anywhere on the list. And I think that is such a really, really tricky thing. And it's almost like that we have this endemic culture in the NHS that says, don't be proud of what you do. Don't congratulate yourself for what you do. Don't give yourself a pat on the back. And actually, when people clap, feel embarrassed by it, feel terribly British about it all. And I think I don't have any quick answers to that. And I think probably it's people like you, Joe, in that real national position that can really, really help us to foster a sense of pride again in what we do. And that will be the kind of long-term thanks, is that actually, you know, we feel valued by the NHS, by the UK for what we do. And, you know, if anyone's listening abroad, whatever your health system is.
Joe, do you want to come in there, or don't have to? I think.
I mean, it completely resonates with me, and yeah, when Odeth said it before, completely and utterly resonates. I mean, you know, all of that personally for me, you know, that not being on the front line, I felt terribly, terribly guilty for, even though I had a couple of opportunities, but kept being pulled back nationally. Felt terribly guilty that I wasn't giving the time to my boys in terms of homeschooling. Feel terribly guilty that I wasn't there for my mum and dad. You know, this comes back to what we're saying about everybody's got their own story. So my story is just my story, and I feel guilty for telling it here. But I guess one of the things I found that all very, very difficult. And one of the things that I felt like I needed to start to role model to my team what I was doing around that. So speaking about it in our coffee chats, in our team chats, God, I feel really guilty about this. Are you feeling like that? Yeah, I feel like that too. But we don't need to feel like that, do we? Because we've done this. You know, we've done 12-hour days this week, Joe, and you know your boys still love you, and you know you get that feedback. So I think that's where, I'm sure we'll come on to psychological safety, is that we've got to foster those cultures where people have trust and honesty, that they can have open conversations like that it's okay, and that other people are feeling like that, and how are you getting over it?
Absolutely, completely agree with you. And you've just coming in really nicely there to some of the questions. So I'm coming over to Beth. Psychological safety is something that's really passionate about all of ours, and Julie's, I know. But a lot of teams just don't have it. And what, you know, I went on NHS Jobs to look at psychology posts, and there's 162 clinical psychology posts out to advert at the moment for NHS. So Beth, coming down to you, please.
Yeah, so there's just a couple of questions coming in on YouTube, probably for you, Julie. So talking about, is there a greater need for more psychological first aid training so that we, as therapists and AHPs, can actually help manage our own psychological well-being in the workplace? And that includes kind of better triage and identification so that we can build our own awareness of our own psychological state.
Okay, I think we can always learn more. Psychological first aid is an approach from the World Health Organization in dealing with people in the aftermath of crisis. So learning skills of that is really, really helpful in terms of helping people after an incident at work, after a bad day at work, helping a patient actually coming through after an incident or health problem, etc. So these are good skills to learn, and they're actually pretty easy, really. So I'll give Rachel the link so that we can add it into the notes from this. But the concept in psychological safety is look, listen, link, and it's this idea of pay attention, really look, listen, hear what people are saying, and link them to their own resource. And so that's either their sense of how they're feeling in the moment will pass, or that sense of maybe how they're feeling is to be expected, or that sense of actually those links of social links, self-care links, team links. So that look, listen, link kind of idea of psychological first aid. There's a bit more to it, but I won't go into it for sake of time, and we will link people in with it.
So that brings us on to nicely to another question that actually you can all answer, which is how can you monitor morale and stress levels across a large team? How are you guys doing that at the moment?
Odette, do you want to come in first, and then we'll see if Julie picks up on what we're saying.
So the trick is to know your team. You have to know your team really, really well, and you kind of look for the cues. I pride myself in the fact that I do know my team, so I know when they're going off or when they need a little bit of additional support because of the way they'll say things or the way they act, and I'll say, you need a holiday or you need a break or something. So as leaders and managers, we really need to learn to know our team and to read them really well, because sometimes they don't recognize that they need support or they need help, and you have to be that person who recognizes it for them and give them the help.
So I think that's great, and I am thinking of this from the other side. If you're someone that looks after a lot of people, or a lot of people in a lot of different places, if you're working across 3 sites or whatever, and you've got multi-professionals, you might not know everyone, and that might not be the fault of the individual, but it might be something that you've acknowledged, that you know, with this going through this pandemic, that you don't know your staff well enough. For people that just manage huge numbers of people, and there's not that opportunity to get to know your staff quite well, there is, in this virtual/digital world, it is so easy to connect with people now.
Yeah.
So it's creating those inclusive and safe spaces, which will be virtual. There's no way around that. You will kind of have like 100 people in a room, and just saying, there's no agenda. Please turn up at 12 o'clock. Please turn up at 4 o'clock. I'm here. I'm your manager. I'm your leader. Whatever if you want to criticize me, if you want to ask questions, if you want to offload, chances are, if you're feeling it, someone else is. Let's all be professional. Let's all be kind. Let's not encourage this, you know, anything negative, but sometimes having that space where people can just offload to each other, other people know that they're feeling the same, other people know that they're struggling, is really important. And do you know, in the healthcare, maybe NHS, maybe in our professions, I don't know, but I don't know if we really have ever done that before. I don't know if en masse we've ever said, I'm vulnerable, I'm putting myself out there as a manager to host something online where my 200 staff can come and basically either tell us how shit I am or how brilliant I am. It could go either way, you don't know, or it could be a little bit in the middle. So my advice as a manager, you know, as a leader, is to try that, and you know, it doesn't always work out like quite how you're going to expect it, but I
true.
think staff do value that, don't they, Death? They do value just you saying, I may not get this right. There's so many things I get wrong in my job.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just it's holding myself to account and saying, I'm sorry if I didn't do that quite right. Tell me how I can do it better next time.
Yeah.
So
Sometimes you have to show your vulnerability, isn't it? So that staff know that you are human as well. And without that, you know, it's that you understand what they're going through. So yeah, it's important.
and tell them this is really hard. This is really hard. I am acknowledging that you are exhausted. I'm acknowledging you've done this. I'm acknowledging there's no end point. I really appreciate what you have done for our department, no matter what role you're in. I appreciate it. I'm thankful. I'm very grateful. You
Yeah.
are amazing. It's impossible to give everyone cupcakes or, you know, Haribo or anything in this what new normal. But them words or death, I mean, everyone's nodding there. They are so powerful to people, and you've got to mean it. The tokenism,
Yeah.
people see through the tokenistic gestures, statements, emails, with no emotion behind them. You've really got to believe what you're saying as a manager. Jo, I know you're dying to come in.
So I completely agree with all that. And when Odette just said about vulnerability there, I feel like I could have virtually kissed her. Because, you know, this, when you were saying, Rachel, about, you know, how do we manage the morale and stress levels of staff? And you just can't possibly, if you've got huge teams. So this comes back to leadership and how the leaders of an organisation create the culture. And that culture then is role modelled. You know, the Batari box, your values create your behaviours then have an impact on somebody else's values, which has an impact on their behaviours. So how we role model that ourselves as leaders, how we role model truly caring for our staff and doing the right thing for our staff, no matter their background, then would create that cultural ripple effect throughout those teams, so that everybody is a leader with those same values and behaviours, caring for each other as individuals across the workforce, no matter what profession you are or what professional background. And just another kind of person who I really love to read, to listen to on YouTube and read is Brené Brown. She talks about leadership and daring to lead and vulnerability. So if people haven't been cited on her work, I'd recommend that to you.
Definitely 100%. Beth.
A really subtle difference in language makes a huge difference. So I overheard somebody seeking some advice from a manager, and the manager didn't say, "What's the problem?" They said, "Tell me about your problem." And just that really subtle change in language made all the difference to how much time that member of staff perceives that there was to talk about the problem, how much detail they could go into, and just the willingness to listen and offload, rather than, you know, what's the problem, hurry up quickly, I don't have time. So just the language I think we use is also really important.
Thank you, Beth. Now, Beth, I'm coming in for any other questions. I'm getting a few in around the same thing, so I'm going to try and condense. So this is more of a therapy question. One of the problems in terms of space and resource, there's been a lot of stuff on Twitter about losing therapy gyms, losing space, losing consultant rooms for psychology, Julie. A bit of a land grab for the people who shout the loudest, who are the most hierarchical. And it really has impacted on how some of these therapies feel valued. And, you know, it's not just in the acute sector, it's in community as well. We're seeing this with community rehab. So we can't sort that problem as a panel. I think it goes down to individual organisations. It goes down to you having good leadership within your AHPs, within your therapies. You know, no one would dare come in my team with me and my boss and say, we're going to take your gym away from you. But that doesn't mean I'm better than anyone else. It just means that that culture is already there in that level of respect. So you need to use this now. You need to use how you are, how you've been treated, maybe not now, but as you recover from this, to say, actually, this wasn't acceptable. We are a valued member of the MDT. of the team to our patients, the patient voice is really important. This tell your patient you can't go to the gym because it's become a storage unit for beds or dialysis machines or whatever it's become. And that would be my advice to people. If it's happening to you, it's happened. You fight it, you'll be obstructive, you'll be resistant. It'll deplete all of your personal energy stores for something that you won't get a positive end result for at this moment in time. But you need, as you recover, get your help from the national team, get your team from people like me, and say, look, how can I approach this to really make a difference moving forward? So the question really is around things happening to AHPs and our colleagues that's making them feel devalued around space, and where can they go with that? So that's my 2 pence worth. Does anyone else want to come in with any other comments? Julie?
So they chucked me out of my office and filled it with storage and told me to go and set up somewhere else, take redeployed nurses to set up a family home. And I said, where? And I had to work it out myself. So that's my personal story. I'm back in my office now, which is great. My regret there is not, you know me, Rachel, I'm relatively feisty. I just buckled because it was a pandemic and you thought it was the right thing to do. So I guess I'm just kind of appealing to the audience and saying, I feel your pain. And it's awful and it's devaluing, but and I've heard this story so many times, which helped me to say to myself, it's not personal. I'm surrounded by headless chickens who are being thoughtless. They're not attacking me. They're not devaluing me. They just don't know what they're doing.
And do you know, in the acute phase, in the pandemic, it was okay to squat. I call them squatters. Say, have the space, have me gym, have whatever you need. We've got no patience in it. It's now the ongoing. It's okay in the height of the pandemic, if you like, the height of the first wave. But I think there's something like that sustained devaluing. You've got your office back. I mean, I'm shocked, because if someone like Julie, it's happened to Julie, I think that is reassuring for everyone out there, because I know her organisation and her team completely value her. But it's that sustained thing, isn't it? For sure. Does anyone else want to come in before we move to the next question? Beth?
In terms of the space, it has other consequences, going back full circle, back to health and well-being. So, I know of people who that they're in essentially box rooms that don't have any windows, don't have any natural daylight, and they're very out of the way, and what that does to their own mental health and well-being, A, being stuck at a computer all the time, B, not having any windows or natural light, and also not sharing offices and things with people anymore because of distancing. It's a very, very isolating space to be in. So potentially, for us, Rachel, as physiotherapists, you might be used to being in a gym, working alongside lots of your colleagues, big open natural space and lots of personable contact. But then you're now very, very isolated in a single room with just a computer for company.
Joe?
So I guess practical advice is I would try and seek out the rationale or the reasoning why the decision making has happened, and why it's kind of happened behind your back or underneath, and I would just be really brave. So first and foremost, if you've got a chief AHP in your organisation, which I really hope you have, and if you haven't, I'd like to know about that. We probably already know, but we might want to do something about it together. So go and see your chief AHP and find out, why has this happened? What's the rationale behind it? How long is it happening for? And have a positive discussion. If there isn't a chief AHP, go to the chief nurse and have that discussion with the chief nurse around, this has happened, it's happened, what's the rationale behind it? How can we work together? But most importantly, and again, this comes back to a lot what Julie says, what Adeth said, what Rachel said, is that we're in the pandemic, and don't try to ensure that the conversation that we're having is positive noise rather than negative noise, because of the effect that whatever this decision has had on you, it may seep out in behaviours that are negative noise rather than positive noise. And I've seen that, and I've done it myself. So again, just being aware of that. But I would be brave and bold and go and ask senior leadership.
Thank you. Okay, so Beth, I don't know if we've got any more questions from YouTube.
There's just one, but I'm not quite sure which bit of the conversation it relates back to, but it's kind of talking around how decisive the planning is and what the ethos from government is from kind of local level down. So I guess it's alluding to the uncertainty and confusion and correlating that to the fear that we're all currently feeling.
Yeah, and I think so. I'm quite fortunate, probably like Joe, to be involved in national discussions, panel discussions, and they're constantly changing. And sometimes when people are in crisis, your staff think they want lots of information and they don't. Staff need to know the minimum to keep them safe, to keep them informed, because it changes so frequently. You can instill fear actually when you know too much. So I get this all the time. Oh, give us some, what's going to happen, and and what do we think, and are we going to still be going through this in March? Well, we definitely will be. The end point isn't coming in the next 6 months, but in terms of what we'll have to do is try and abide by regulations and restrictions that are there, because when we do that as a community, we all have, it encourages those values and those same beliefs and those sort of rules, I suppose, and everyone's on the same page. So there's something around that. Obviously there's Julie's in Wales will have different things going on, different places. I think within that respect, you've got to look after yourself as a community, whatever your community looks like. In the words of my friend Gita, like, find your tribe. Your tribe might be your team, but then your bigger team. And there's definitely something in that, and you've got to create calm leadership. Calm and collective leadership is what we need. I talk about the 7 C's all the time after the 7 P's, and I think there's something around that and the communication around that as well. So that would be my answer to that question, Beth. But again, if anyone wants to talk about that in more detail, please DM us. Some of the last questions I'm just going to summarize with, I'm conscious of time, where this is going to be the last bit before we close up, is around recognition. So some of the professions, physiotherapists, respiratory physios, I mean, what a time to be a respiratory physio. I mean, it's sexier than it's ever been, and it's never been sexy, has it? But actually I am a massive advocate of all of the AHPs and all of our supports. We're healthcare scientists, we're physiologists, we're psychologists, and it's really reaching out to people who work so hard behind the scenes, who haven't had that media spotlight. And everyone says, oh, the nurses have had it, but actually there's so many nurses that aren't ICU nurses, aren't respiratory nurses, that have done so much. So it's reach out to your colleagues, reach out to other professions and say, you've done a great job, like, thank you so much. And just really like start acknowledging people around you, because it's everyone's responsibility to do that. I really believe that, and I think once we start talking like that and start investing in each other, this hopefully we can nip all of this kind of fragmentation and divide that we're seeing. There's lots of comments about that, Julie, that they're seeing, and the frustrations, and some of it's like we all, I've got another female panel, and it wasn't deliberate. The 2 men that were meant to be on this panel couldn't make it last minute. So, but we do go home and we take it out on those closest to us. But in a pandemic, actually, we haven't really been doing it that much. Maybe because I don't see mine, I don't know. But there is something in like, we're internalizing it more. So just be nice to people, tell them, appreciate them. That's answering those questions that I had on DM. I don't know if anyone's got any comments about that, but I am going to come round the panel and ask for your final thoughts and motivations, because I hate having the final word. But first of all, does anyone want to add on that and then give anything in? Beth, I can see your mic's off.
Yeah, there's just one last question that's coming on YouTube. So this is from Andrew. It's a great question. Would you advise a team session discussing what matters to them, and also discussing in a safe, open space about how the team are feeling, and how would you encourage staff to engage in that kind of conversation?
I mean,
yes.
Definitely. Julie and Joe, I'm going to come to you. Julie first and then Joe.
I'm going to keep it simple. Yes. Cake, lunch, whatever's COVID friendly.
So I'd say yes, albeit a session like that, if you haven't had a session like that for your team, could be quite daunting depending on the culture in that team. One thing that I do in our team meetings, on the agenda I have a check-in and a check-out. and we have extra time for that. And that's just general discussion about how we're feeling, what happened to you this morning, how did the school run go, did you get the dog, did you able to take the dog out for a walk? And that kind of just encourages that then if you got to a session like that, it probably wouldn't be as daunting.
People seen the blob tree before, where it's just a picture of like blobs that are in different positions, and some of them are swinging, like hanging from branches by their fingernails, some of them are swinging on ropes, some of them are on the floor crying, and you basically just get them to circle which blob they are most feeling like, so that they don't actually necessarily have to put it into words or, you know, describe it in front of a group. They just, in their own minds, they just associate how they're feeling with a visual representation of that. There's also one called the duck scale. So there's a picture of an inflatable duck, 1 to 9. So that number 1 is the duck fully inflated, and number 9 is the duck that all the air has come out of it and it's just flat as a pancake. So those again are really good scales for just staff to try and gauge where they're at on any given day, week, hour, whatever it might be.
That's brilliant.
Thank you, Beth. Blobs means something different to a Geordie girl, I'm just going to say.
They're a bit more like jelly beans, Rachel. Speech and language therapists use the blob tree a lot, but some people call it the jelly bean tree. They look like jelly beans.
Okay, right, thanks. Okay, on that note, I'm just going to come around the panel for any thoughts of wisdom, any comments, anything like that. Odette, I'm going to come to you first, please.
Just one of the things that I learned throughout this pandemic is that I need to look after myself too, in order to look after my staff. And I was not very good at doing that. So, I'll keep it quite brief because I know we're running out of time. So my sister passed away in June, and I was too busy to grieve. I thought, so I put it behind me because I was busy supporting the BME staff at work. I was busy supporting the discharge to assess team and all of that bit. And then one of my psychology friends said to me, "Odette, have you actually grieved for your sister?" And I realized that I hadn't. And so it was a wake-up call for me, because I thought, well, I can take as much as I can take, but if you don't look after yourself, can't pour from an empty cup. That's always my phraseology. So I've learned that I need to look after me in order to look after my staff.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us, Odette. That was really personal, and I'm sure a lot of people will get a lot of that from that as well. So thank you. Beth, coming into you.
I think back at the beginning, as Julie was speaking, I think the thing that struck me is that it's never the first straw that breaks the camel's back. And I think I was running on a sense of adrenaline, at the peak, and just doing what needed to be done, and that kind of absolute adrenaline response of just do what needs doing. But kind of now, as the layers of complexity are getting added on, services are resuming, services don't look the same, all of that pressure that comes along with workforce and staffing and delivering good services to patients, it feels like the straws are getting added. So I guess just acknowledge that everything that causes additional stress to you is an extra straw, and work out how to maybe offload some of those by sharing some of the pressure. Is there another colleague you could speak to? I know that some of my AHP kind of peers have been amazing, and I've grown new relationships with them that hadn't existed before the pandemic. So in a lot of ways, I'm glad that I found those people.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks so much for supporting us tonight. Really appreciate it. Jo, coming down to you.
So I was going to say the same thing as Odette, in terms of you've got to care for yourself first before you can care for anybody else. And I'm the same. I haven't been great at doing that myself, but I have observed burnout in others. And I just wanted to share, a colleague of mine who has experienced burnout talked about when she was recovering, a kind of a computer analogy where she needed to have a clear out of her files and delete some files. And that analogy has been really, really useful for me in terms of keeping on top of my anxiety levels, of my well-being, where I'm thinking, because the analogy of I need to get rid of something out of my head because it's too full, I need to drop some files, has been a really, really useful analogy for caring for myself. So it is that caring for yourself before you can care for others, but you can get some top tips about how to do that from others.
Thank you, Jo, and just thanks again for being here, because I think having national teams on the calls like this is just so important for that visibility, and just to know that you're human too, and there's no superpower. You're one of us. So thank you so much. Now, Julie, every time I have you on a podcast, everyone's like, where can I get a Julie? How do you know Julie? I'm like, oh, I've known Julie for years. She's amazing. So, final thoughts, Julie, from you to close.
Oh, well, my Jerry Springer moment. I think you've got all of the good stuff out of me already, but I guess one thing that really struck me when I heard Odette, thank you, Odette, for being just so brave on a sort of live stream. But it's so important for us to own our feelings right now. We can't slap on a happy face. We can't always just try and look on the bright side. If we're sad, we need to feel sad. If we're angry, we need to acknowledge and express that anger and feel justified in it. If we're scared, it really is okay. This is terrifying what we're going through. And if we're actually having a good time, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad about that. Really embrace your feelings, name your feelings, acknowledge your feelings, whether you do it on a sliding scale or whether you do it in a team or you do it on your own. Know them, own them, don't try to bury them, and then you won't kick the cat and displace them onto your team members or your long-suffering husbands and wives. You'll be able to make sense of them, and you'll find your way through.
And on that note, I want to thank you all so much. Thanks everyone for your comments. Please DM and reach out if you need to, and hope